Thank you.
Thanks, Al.
All right. How's everyone doing? I know it's been a little bit of a long day today, and we've already had a lot of amazing sessions. And for the next 45 minutes here, we have an incredible opportunity to chat with Casey Winters. If you try to look up what he's done in his past lives and currently today, you will be absolutely mind blown because he's had such broad exposure to a variety of some of the fastest growing companies and startups and opportunities and products in Silicon Valley here. So we've got a lot of really cool opportunities to dig into further insights. And I want to start with just a quick introduction to Casey by passing it to him himself. And Casey, could you just tell us a little bit about what are you up to right now and kind of recently, what have you been up to and what's most exciting for you today?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for doing this. So I left my job as the Chief Product Officer at Eventbrite about a month ago. And so I'm currently advising Eventbrite 3 days a week, and I'm also advising another company called Whatnot, which is live shopping collectibles marketplace. And I'm on the board of a company called Beak, which you can think of as Netflix for audio in Latin America. So basically just advising or on the board of a few companies, and yeah, not really sure what's next.
Yeah, well, tell us a little bit about how you got here. What was your path and career path leading up to today? And if you could focus specifically on the product pieces of it, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So I started my career as an analyst at apartments.com, and it was my job to measure all the things we were doing to drive leads to our apartment rental properties who are our customers. And that was a great way to learn about all of these ways you could grow on the internet, things like SEO, Google AdWords, affiliate marketing, email marketing. So I actually started working on optimizing those channels once I understood them. And then I started trying to work on connecting that to the product experience. So how could we get the leads to convert better? How could we get customers to prefer us over Craigslist or Rent.com? And I got this feedback that I was this weird marketing and product hybrid. And the company didn't really know what to do with that. Those are two totally separate departments. So I went in a more entrepreneurial route. I ended up joining Grubhub as the 15th employee. And they were like, you can do whatever the hell you want as long as it gets more people to order food. We don't care if you change the product. We don't care if you spend money on marketing. So that's exactly what I did. So from Series A to IPO, I focused on driving growth of the demand side. And then after that is when I joined Pinterest, and that's where we met. And that was the first time I really had the title of product manager, but it was really, and there was also a name for the type of product management work I was doing, which is growth. So really it was all about how do we connect more people to the value of Pinterest. So did that from 40 million monthly active users to 150 million monthly active users. Didn't really know what I wanted to do next, so I joined a VC, and I just worked on helping their companies with growth. And what I really found there is that I've been lucky to go through kind of two early stage to IPO journeys with Grubhub and Pinterest. And most people starting a company, it's their first time, it's all their employees' first times. Everything's broken, they don't know what they need to fix versus what they can ignore for years because it doesn't matter. So I decided to leave Greylock and do that on my own. So I fortunate to work with a bunch of great companies, Eventbrite, Tinder, Thumbtack, Canva, and did that for a couple of years. Eventbrite, one of my clients, opened up this Chief Product Officer role and asked me to take it. So for the past 3.5 years, I've been doing that. And that's been an interesting ride, which maybe we can get into. And yeah, that basically ties us up to today. So at Eventbrite, as the Chief Product Officer, I led the product management, product design, research, and growth marketing teams. About a 100-person team. Companies, almost 900 people. So yeah, mixture of this weird marketing, product, research, growth sort of stuff has always been what I'm doing.
Excellent. And let's dive into Eventbrite a little bit because the theme of today's conference is opportunities in uncertain times. And you can imagine that a business like Eventbrite, one that was predicated upon offline events and in-person interactions, at the start of the pandemic, what does this business ultimately end up doing? And being at the helm of leading product and where that goes, Casey, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so basically our core business became illegal in every country we operated in the month of April 2020. During that time, I was asked to rewrite the strategy of the business on a Saturday so that we could review it on Sunday so that we could start pitching to private equity to raise money so we wouldn't go out of business on Monday. We did raise that money. So in the month of April, we raised $100 million in debt. We laid off 45% of the company, and we paused all marketing spend, all merit-based promotion spend. We stopped paying most of our SaaS contracts. Literally everything you could do to save money, we did. During that month, we had what's called negative revenue, which I didn't know was possible, but it's when you're processing more refunds than transactions. And the smart money at the time was basically to say, oh, well, you got to go all in on online events. That's the future. That's where everything's moving. There were a bunch of startups that were raising a bunch of money doing that. A bunch of incumbents were building various forms of online event products. Zoom was just exploding in usage. We chose not to do that. We looked at our customers and their needs, and we said that while online events is a real market and we're going to support it, we're going to do that by integrating with players like Zoom. And our long-term strategy is going to be about getting back to in-person events, and how do we help these creators who are having a really tough time pivoting their business to online or to going dormant, waiting for it to be safe again. How do we switch from just being a ticketing provider that helps them get paid to helping drive their growth so that their business is more successful? So that meant in October of 2020, we acquired a marketing tools company. We integrated that into our product and launched a marketing suite the following year that helps event creators get better at their own marketing, because they're generally not marketing experts. So things like email, Facebook advertising, etc. And then this year we launched an ad product that helps event creators get access to more of the consumers that come to Eventbrite to find things to do. Company's now been cash flow positive for 5 straight quarters. It's growing, everything's healthy. But yeah, there were some dicey moments there.
Yeah, well, thanks for outlining that and sharing us with us sort of the insider look on what happened in Eventbrite. And actually, Decode and many of the organizations that are involved in today's conference are also heavily reliant on and active users of Eventbrite as a product. Can you also shed light for us, like relative to product management, because that's something we want to explore in today's conversation. Can you introduce to us some of the different ways in which product teams are organized? Like at Eventbrite specifically, like how did you oversee everything that happened, all the new products, all the new features, and then there are also other areas related to growth. Like how do you oversee all of that? What are the different areas of that?
Yeah, I mean, short answer is probably not well, but there's a few different structures that make sense in software-based companies. And the overarching structure is that engineering, product, design, supporting roles need to be aligned and have as close to the same organizational structure of each other as possible. So that's the core way we do things at Eventbrite, as well as how we did them at Pinterest, which is the structure is by default a cross-functional team of the people who are required to work together to build a great product solution for our customers. The core of that is usually engineering, product management, and design, but it can include analytics, it can include marketing, depending on what the problem we're trying to solve for the customer and the business is. So then, how do you break those divisions up? There's basically a few different methods that you can use. One is you can break them up by customer. So to take Eventbrite example, we have event creators, and then we have event ticket buyers, event attendees, right? So the highest level structure is I had a head of product for you creators and a head of product for consumers. Another structure that you can use is you can break out the different pods of teams by the value prop that they're working on improving. So at Pinterest, our core product team was broken out into discovering, saving, and doing, which were the 3 value props of Pinterest. And then another structure that you can use is that you can break up the teams based on the type of product development they're doing. So there's product development that's what we call like 0 to 1 innovation, like we're building a totally new product value prop. There's making the product incrementally better, incrementally more valuable by building new features. So people call that feature development or core product. There's product that's connecting more people to the current value of the product, which is typically what growth teams do. And then there's also technical scaling work to make sure you can continue to support more users and that your engineers, designers, et cetera, can continue to move fast as there's more people and more code and all that kind of stuff, which you typically think of as platform teams. So what you tend to see at companies is they'll be mixing and matching the customer type, the value proposition that you're working on, or maybe the specific skill set, like growth versus platform versus new features. And at a company of Eventbrite size, like the org structure is a mishmash of the three of those principles together, as was Pinterest. So Pinterest had, in core product area, discover, save, and do, very value prop driven, but then it also had a growth team that was completely separate and an advertising team that was completely separate. And the ads team works with a different customer, which is the advertiser. All the other teams primarily focus on leveraging consumers. So those are the three elements that tend to mix together. Any org structure is insufficient to providing value. I think it's Conway's law that basically says, however you structure, you're going to ship that org chart to your customers, and they're going to notice the seams which separate teams. So one of the things that we think about a lot is, if you've decided to go in a certain structure, what are the processes or other mitigations you're going to leverage to make how noticeable that is to the customer, to make it less noticeable to the customer. And that's something, as a product leader, you spend a lot of time trying to figure out.
Thanks for breaking that down for us. And as a follow-up, in relation to some of the cross-functional team organizations that you just described there, I think one thing that could be interesting for the audience to understand is, if you are, let's say, leading the product organization or working on the product team specifically, then how do you gain that authority, or how do you gain that trust with some of the cross-functional stakeholders to kind of charge forward with the product in the same direction?
I think different companies have different cultures when it comes to answering this question. So Uber was famous for having a cultural value that I think was described as step on other people's toes. And it basically meant that you could go anywhere in the product and build something if you found an opportunity. You didn't have to go get permission from that product manager or from that engineering manager. You could just go in there and take care of business. Eventbrite's not like that. Eventbrite, we work really hard to drive alignment up front, and then we can row together as a team for a very long time. So if you try to kind of jump out and go make an impact without aligning people, you'll kind of find the organization pulls you back to step one, where everyone understands why you're doing what you're doing. They've been able to contribute to that thought process, and then they can help you in being successful after that point. So that's a little bit more of the style of what I like to do in general. It's kind of the classic, like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Eventbrite prioritizes going together. There's a bunch of different things we do to try to make sure we always go together. Some of that is the planning process of, like, building out your strategy and building out your objectives and key results that you're working on, and making sure that cross-functional team, all the appropriate disciplines are represented, and building that together. There's a driver of that's ultimately making the call, which you can call, a directly responsible individual, or you can call, a single-threaded leader, which is the Amazon term. Not really important, but you want to have a group that all feels like they're owners of a decision and a direction we're going. And then you also want to have one person in that group that it's clear everyone can go to when they have questions or when the executive needs updates. So that's what we try to build into the planning process. And then once you're actually developing products, we take a lot of feedback in from customer support or sales, directly from our customers. We look at data. We pull all of those things, into the product manager's orbit to make effective decisions, and then we communicate that out through a go-to-market process, where we're appropriately training support on what's about to happen. We're appropriately training sales on what's about to happen. And you have to iterate on that process the same way you iterate on your product, because there's no perfect product development process. There's just the appropriate thing for the level of scale, and then as you grow, the problems become different and it needs to be edited. So that's something I work on a lot, and we have a team called Product Operations that it's their job to iterate on the product development process and make it better every quarter.
Great, and so that ideal operating model for product working, how have you seen that evolve over time, or has it evolved over time? Like, you've really had one of the earliest careers in product management, really, since it was incepted. And so tell us a little bit about how you've seen that change or evolve, or maybe it's really the same as when it first all started.
Well, yeah, I think things didn't operate very cross-functionally when I started doing this type of work, right? Which is why that kind of product versus marketing thing was such a huge deal at Apartments.com, and where it was more seen as an asset at Grubhub. So, I think there's been an evolution in how we ship software. We used to plan every single detail out, go work for 2.5 years to build it, and then ship it and hope we got every decision right. And now we break problems down. We try to release software every day. We learn what customers are using and not using and the impact that's having on the business, and we iterate based on that feedback loop. And my goal is to try to get that feedback loop as tight as possible. So that's been like the biggest shift. So there's this push, which I'd say is a little bit engineering or product management centric, to make decisions quickly so we can get things in front of customers and then learn from them to ultimately find the big insight, the big revenue, whatever. But then also, with more and more specialized functions being created, researchers were not a thing when I started my career. Product marketing was not a term I really heard until like the second decade of my career. There's all these more specialized functions that want to be involved and have knowledge or expertise they contribute to make things more successful. So the default thing that I think happens at scale is as you go from a startup of just a couple people to a Google is you used to have like one person to align with, and now you have 50 people to align with. And of course you just can't align with 50 different people with different expertises, perhaps even different goals in mind, very quickly. So the natural trend was kind of this move of, well, iterate quickly, but then involve more people, and then it starts to feel like you're not iterating quickly. And now I think what we're trying to get to is saying, okay, there's definitely going to be more people, there's going to be more things involved, but to preserve that speed of development and learning, we limit who needs to learn about each specific thing. And because there's trust built in other ways between all the different functions, at Eventbrite we use something called the DAISY model, which is for any particular thing that's being worked on, who's the driver of that, who's the approver of that, who's collaborating, and who's informed. And you have to recognize that even if you're part of that team or part of that initiative, you may not be on the DAISY model for some of the things that are going on, and you just have to have trust that the other people who are making kind of all the right decisions, and that you'll learn any of the key insights if they become relevant to you. So I'd say that's like a big push and pull I've seen, which is the rise of Agile versus Waterfall is that speed of iteration, the rise of specialized role. The marketer used to do everything, including product management, when I started my career, and now there's product managers and different types of product managers, and there's researchers, and there's quantitative researchers and qualitative researchers, and product marketers and brand marketers, all these, and now there's content strategists. There's just all sorts of these specialized roles coming out, and there's a give and take between that. I would say the other big shift has been everything an engineer, product manager, designer used to do in building software was build new stuff. There's even kind of a framing of what this is called now, which is called the next feature fallacy, which is like, oh, we're not growing fast enough, but when we launch this new feature, our growth is going to take off. And there's a few ways in which that's pretty terrible. One is features are not easy to build, and once they're built, they're even harder to maintain, especially as you multiply them across all the new features you're building. Anything not feature related or product related in terms of getting more people to use the product was marketing's job or sales' job. Now in 2022, it's mostly product and engineering's job to drive adoption of the things they built. Which means think more critically around, if I'm launching a new feature, how am I going to get people to use it? How are they going to discover it inside my product? How am I going to tell if this is aiding in acquisition of customers more generally? And that's led to some specialization in the types of engineers, designers, product managers. I think there's some really early companies that were good at this, like Hotmail, which is like showing that instead of buying a billboard or a TV ad, I can literally just say sent by Hotmail at the bottom, and everyone learns about Hotmail from sending email from other companies. So I think that's like the other really big shift that's been more relevant for me is how do we think about the code itself driving the growth instead of spending a bunch of money on advertising, which then makes product engineering design more accountable to the business goals instead of, well, I built a shiny great thing, it's not my fault no one's using it. Turns out it is. Either it's a bad thing, or you didn't think about how you're going to get people to understand it, to discover it, and value it. So those are some of the really big shifts, but I could probably talk for 4 hours about this.
Well, thanks for giving us a glimpse into some of that. I want to actually go back to something you described relative to your experience with Eventbrite, or perhaps even in other experiences you have as well, which is, in uncertain times, and the ones that we can't ignore right now are the macroeconomy of the looming recession perhaps, or inflationary effects, but sometimes we don't necessarily have the data or the insight that tells us exactly where to go. Perhaps that was the case with Eventbrite, or perhaps you knew exactly the answer there. Would love to kind of hear a little bit more about that. But given those types of situations, how does a person in product think about their decisions or their processes? Are there tools, frameworks? Like what does a product manager fall back on, and what are the ways in which they can effectively strategize and make those calls?
Yeah, I think there's a tendency, because we have more ways to accumulate data and insights, to try to completely de-risk everything that we're going to build. And it can cause analysis paralysis or research paralysis. And I've certainly seen that with people on my team in the past. And I think what people tend to forget is that a lot of times the best way to collect data is to go do something and see the reaction. So I have a really strong bias to action in product development, because changing things is a good way to collect more data, to collect more feedback. So if this is something that's very different by business model, I think. So if you're an enterprise software company where people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with you, as a product manager, you can really get away with going to your customer, ask them what they want, ask them how much they're willing to pay for it, build it, accept their check, and move on. And if you're consumer land, you have the other extreme, like take our time at Pinterest, where there's hundreds of millions of users, you throw out an A/B test, half the users see one thing, half the users see the other thing, and you determine which one improves the metrics you're trying to move, whether it's retention or monetization or things like that. Eventbrite, especially on the event creator sides, neither of those. So we have a good amount of event creators, but it's less than 1 million per year. So you can't easily run an A/B test, but they're also small businesses. They're not like the most rational actors, inside a big company. So you can't just go to them and say, hey, what thing can I build for you, and how much of a check are you willing to write? So what we have to do is we have to go talk to our customers or potential customers, and not focus so much on the solutions they're asking for, but focus on the problems they're dealing with in their business, and really try to understand those well. Then we have to take in the data of what we're seeing, who uses our product, how they use our product, what parts do they struggle with, what parts do they love. And then we also have to take in the data of other internal stakeholders, our customer support team, our sales team, our marketing team. And we try to bring all that together, mix it in a pot, and come up with the right ideas on what to work on, and then get them in the hands of our customers as fast as possible to learn where we were right or where we were wrong, and then be able to iterate. And I think you have to feel comfortable that a lot of the time you're still going to get it wrong. So one of the things that we do is, when we're beginning our phase of building, we have a meeting called the concept review. And the concept review, we talk about the problem we want to work on, we talk about the solution, the potential solutions that we've evaluated. Here's the potential solution we want to go down, and also what's our level of confidence in that solution. Some things are really dialed in. We just know the problem super well, we know I have the right solution, and in that case, build the thing right. Don't cut any corners on the design, don't cut any corners on the technical scalability, just get the thing right and ship it. But there are many times where you're well, we know the problem really well, we're just not sure if there's the right solution. And that's where we'll do something that's called a minimum viable feature or a minimum viable product, where we will cut some corners on the technical scalability. We will cut some corners potentially on design quality, because doing things really well is not simple, and we're not sure it's worth the effort yet until we get more validation from the market that we're building the right thing. And then there's times where it's we're not even sure this is the right problem. In which case, we're not coding anything. We're gonna go do some hacky prototype or some Figma files, and we're gonna show it to some users to try to get more insight into whether we got the problem correctly, to help us move along that curve. But we should build something more real. And I think that's really important to tune the type of development, which is why basically very few companies in software now do the 2.5-year waterfall cycles that I was used to at apartments.com, because there's usually always more signal to get through getting stuff out there and getting the reaction.
Gotcha. And Casey, something that kind of stood out to me as you were describing that, you touched on some of the skills of a product manager being everything along the lines of research, design, marketing. There's so many others there, but I think there are a lot of folks in the audience who are perhaps aspiring product managers, or people looking to upskill or up-level what they're building their skills in. How would you give advice, or what would you recommend for folks who are thinking about a career in product? Like, what are some of the skills that an individual needs to build, maybe when they're early in their career versus later?
My first point would be like, maybe you want to rethink that. This job kind of sucks. I don't think I've ever met a product leader or a product manager that's like, yo, I'm killing this job. Like everyone just feels like they're barely making it. It's really hard to do it well. And I think part of the allure of product management is the thought that like, oh, when I'm the product manager, I get to make the calls on what we build, on what problems we focus on, which is not actually true. So a product manager is there to make sure the right decisions get made, not to make them. The fewer decisions a product manager needs to make, generally the better a product manager is doing, because the team's well informed and can make them closer to the code or closer to the Figma file. So really, a product manager's job can be defined differently in different companies. But the way we thought about it at Eventbrite is you're broadly responsible for the success of the product. Success of product comes from aligning different groups together to build something cohesive. So you have to be good at communication and negotiation. It comes from having a deep insight into what the customer and business problem is, and working with that broader group to make sure a good solution emerges. Solution probably shouldn't come from you, but you can have input in it. And that means you need to not only be able to talk to customers effectively, to be able to leverage data effectively to understand the problems, but be able to translate that to people from different backgrounds who are ultimately going to work together to build a great solution. And you need to de-risk wherever possible, because engineering and design time is expensive. So the least amount of time you can have working on things that don't work, the more effective, efficient the team will be. And then your job is to also basically say, like, how can the team move faster every day? Like, what are the things that's blocking an engineer? What's the things that's blocking a designer? What's the things that's blocking the go-to-market team from being able to communicate to their customers about this? And how do I optimize, whether it's how sprints are organized, or how we pull data, or what's in our dashboard, so that everyone can move faster. Those tend to be like the things in orbit of a PM. Again, they'll be slightly different depending on the organization you're at. So what's fun about it is you get to mix a lot of different skills, you get to work with a lot of different people. What's not so fun about it is most people don't think you're doing a good job ever. Because it's hard to please all of these different stakeholders that are doing really important work. Despite that, I still work at this job because the rewards are when you have real impact on the customer and the business, and being the nexus around that. Even if you're not necessarily given the credit, I think there's just the achievement part of it is really motivating to see that impact happen in the graph, or in the smile from the customer, things like that.
Great. And Casey, how do you learn new skills? Like, what are your preferred modes of learning? What do you do to improve and sharpen your own toolkit?
I talk to a lot of people, and I read a lot. I don't read books per se. I find them very inefficient. But I read, generally every book is just a blog post that's been expanded so the person can make money doing it. So I try to find, like, what's the blog post version or the podcast version of that insight. And I think that's something that really helped me early in my career, because when I was just starting out, there were like a few dedicated blogs on things like SEO, and I went from knowing nothing to being the smartest person in the room like a year later, because I was just reading this stuff every day. So I try to find people that I think have great insights, read everything that they do. Whether it's tweets or essays they write, or things like that. So I've over time curated a careful list of sources in RSS feeds, which none of you even know about, and Twitter follows, to make sure that I'm continuing to learn. And that's served me really well. And then the other thing that I do a lot is just try to meet new people all the time working on this craft and see what I can learn from them. So I generally will carve out some time Friday afternoon to try to meet someone new, whether it's a new company or a new product leader or a new engineering leader, et cetera, to continue to grow my network. And those are people that I can reach out to when I have specific issues, but also people anytime I chat with, I tend to learn things from.
Great. And Casey, if individuals were interested in reaching out to you or just kind of thinking about general advice for the room as well, do you have any tips for people in terms of if people wanted to reach out and meet more folks in product or want to learn more from other experts? What are some good elements to include in that pitch or in that initial reach out?
Yeah, great question. I would say one of the things that's incredibly surprising about Silicon Valley, and actually one of the secrets to its success, is that it's a very pay-it-forward culture. So the response rate on you reaching out with a well-articulated email to someone who is very far along in their career is incredibly high. And most people just don't ever send the email or reach out on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever. So the first step is just do the reach out, biased towards doing that. The worst thing someone can do is not respond, and you'd be very surprised at the response rate. And then in terms of what tilts me towards responding versus not responding is how clearly they've articulated what they actually want me to help with. I'm biased towards trying to answer every email, answer every tweet, every LinkedIn request. But the person who just sends me a LinkedIn request and doesn't say anything, I'm not responding to. The person who's like, I read this and this and this, and I had these questions, and if I got this amount of time with you, I'd be able to solve this problem. I'll generally respond to almost every time. I think it also helps when the people reaching out know the types of things you're well attuned to help with. I generally work on marketplaces and user-generated content, and I generally work on things like growing something that has product market fit. So when someone reaches out and be like, I want help finding product market fit with crypto, I'd be like, bro, I don't know anything about crypto. What are you doing? Neither does anyone else, it turns out. But they're the right people for the right types of problems, and the more you've done your research and said hey, I'm an early marketplace founder and I'm having this liquidity issue, I'll be like, cool, I got you. Let's find some time, let's talk. And what I found is that being that open is rarely abused, but if someone tries to abuse that, then I'll just tell them hey, you're abusing this resource, stop. Yeah.
Great tips for reaching out to Casey if you wanted to connect with them after. And just kind of on that final note, Casey, if people wanted to know what you're up to, can they find you on LinkedIn, Twitter? Where are you active? Where are you sharing what you're working on these days?
Yeah, I'm reluctantly active on LinkedIn. Definitely anything I write will end up being a post there. Though I won't do that stupid thing where I put the link in the comments to get more engagement. I'm just going to link to my blog post. I don't care about what gets me more eyeballs on the feed. And then I'm active on Twitter as well. My handle is OneCaseMan. And then my blog is caseyaccidental.com, where I think I've been blogging for about 12 years now. Irregularly, but consistently.
And very good stuff there. Lots of actionable insights for folks who've been working in the space and kind of companies that are at product market fit and looking to grow as well. So those are the places you can find Casey. And with that, let's transition to Q&A. What are the questions that you might have for Casey around his experiences at product, at Eventbrite, really anything? Open forum here.
Thank you so much, Casey. One question I had, you talked about the different steps you would take versus when you know you have the problem right versus when you don't know you have the problem right. And the question there is, how do you feel confident that you at least have the problem right when thinking about the customer?
Yeah, great question. So generally any kind of team, which we call squads at Eventbrite, but there are different names for it, like pods, whatever. A group of engineers, designers, PMs, whatever, working on the same problem. The more they've been working on it, the more they know when they understand the problem versus they don't. So a new team working on a problem for the first time generally never should have a lot of confidence. But for example, at Pinterest, in year 3 of optimizing SEO, we're pretty good at knowing what the challenges were and what needed to be done. So that's one element. But in general, that process, the concept review, what we do is we force teams to show us the data and the research they have, giving us their level of confidence. So I am basically a second guess on where they think they are. So if they're coming in we're super confident, here's the data, here's the research, and I don't think either of that is compelling, then I'll say like, okay, I don't think you're as far along as you think you are. We should maybe do something a bit, hackier. But in general, this is, teams when they're formed should generally be mission-based teams where they're like, and I always tell people there's a semicolon in your mission. The first part of the sentence is the value you're trying to create for the customer. The second part of the sentence is the value that will create for the business in the long run. So if you have a really well-defined mission at the beginning, you're going to be like very unconfident on everything. But if you're optimizing like year 3 or 4 of that mission, generally your confidence is higher by default. So that's the main element. And then the other element is like the quality and quantity of the data or research that's been done.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Going once?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of good method and also a lot of good advice on actually we can implement in our young age to reach out to people that we look up to. That's awesome. So my question would be like on marketing. I told you a little bit about that stuff, maybe earlier a little bit. So I want to reach out to like customer or potential prospect that is like older than me, or probably their first year or second year of work. Would it be advice on that, on the marketing standpoint, getting the user research with like a low budget?
Yeah. So generally when you're building a startup, there's the pre-product market fit phase, where you're trying to get just enough customers in to validate your product hypotheses. And there's the post-product market fit phase, which is like, the product works and you're trying to find all the customers that it will work for and get them to start using your product. And in thinking about growth of those two segments, I call them Kindle strategies and Fire strategies. Kindle strategies are there to get those first few users, and in every startup I've ever seen, people use incredibly non-scalable methods to do that. Airbnb hacked Craigslist and sold like election-themed cereal. I doubt that's going to be what any of you do for your startup, right? HipCamp, one of the companies I advised, they built like a map of where you could watch the solar eclipse, in campgrounds. And they got a bunch of press for that allowed them to get links to drive SEO. So generally all of these early stage strategies are super hacky, non-scalable, non-performant, but they get you enough users in to validate that like you have the right thing. Once you validate you have the right thing, there's generally only a few scalable strategies to grow. In B2B, it's sales, or performance marketing, or what we call content loops, which is get people in your product to create content that then can be shared either to Google, like we did at Pinterest, or to other users that bring them into product, or virality, which means users invite other users because they want to use the product together. So generally in this early phase, you're not trying to get 1 million users, you're just trying to get enough users to validate that like your product works. And then you're trying to sequence from that once you know the product value is well described, those people are sticking around, they like it, they're telling other people, to then say, okay, well, how do I sequence that to one of those things? Sales and marketing, if you want to sequence to those, then you need to be making money out of the product so that you can hire salespeople or pay marketing budgets. For content or virality, there needs to be a high enough conversion rate of the people who use the product to either send an invite or create content that brings someone in like an invite would. And the mistake that some startups can make is they can get really good at the hacky stuff, but it's not unlocking the scalable stuff like sales or performance marketing or content loops or viral loops. So that's generally the way I think about it. So to answer your question, I can't tell you what hacky, non-scalable thing is going to work for you, because it's been different in pretty much every startup I've seen. So do hacky, non-scalable things like you're doing and find which ones are actually working the best. But the step I would urge you to think about is, okay, how is that going to sequence to something that can grow me sustainably? Either because I'm making a lot of money and I can reinvest that into advertising or salespeople, or I'm getting users to invite others or to create content that then gets its own distribution.
And that's a really great framework there to wrap up too. Kindle versus Fire. Kindle, hacky, unscalable things that you got to do to get there, and then scale from there through Fire strategies. Blow it up, set it on fire. Awesome. So that's all the time we have today. Let's give Casey a round of applause for his great insights.
Thank you all.